friends. Nice to have you with us here on the 10th of October, it is. What I'd like to talk about tonight is preparation. I mean, all of us for the last week or two have been consumed at some level with all of the weather and meteorological things that are happening down in North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee. And now with this latest hurricane that's gone a little south of Tampa and worked its way across Florida. If you followed this at all, what you've discovered very quickly, particularly with the first Helene Earth hurricane, is that this was an extraordinarily unusual kind of an event. That is to say, I've seen some things that suggest that it was something like 0.1% likely that something like this would have happened, particularly as it worked its way up inland with the same velocity and strength that it did. It's very unusual, and that it would sit there and park itself in one place and dump literally trillions of gallons of water all over the place. And the likelihood of something like that happening is very, very, very remote. And so it brings up the subject very obviously about preparation for some kind of anomalous event like this. Many of you know that I'm involved in our county, Morgan County in West Virginia, with backup communications. I'm the founder and the president of the Morgan County Emergency Communications Network, which is a network of amateur radio operators that are working together to, first of all, build an infrastructure and a network across the counties, which includes, to start with, two significant towers and repeaters and other kinds of radios and multiple kind of functionality. And our objective is to build a multi-layered communications network that will provide communications even when nothing else works. And when nothing else works, what you're talking about is significant kind of events like natural disasters, like what's happened in the Carolinas, North Carolina, and Tennessee. And also, there's a variety of other kind of things, man-made, accidents of one sort or another at the north end of our county. It's the main line of the C&O Railroad that goes through here, and so you've always got the possibility that you'd have some major derailment or something that would happen up there. There are natural disasters like ice storms and such, and there are kind of man-made events like, in our case, if there were big problems in Washington or Baltimore, for whatever reason, there were nuclear weapons or natural disasters or whatever it was that were anything like what's happening in North Carolina, what you would do, what it would generate is a mass exodus that would all run down Interstate 70 down here. And that runs just about 6-7 miles north of our little town. And there would be hundreds of thousands of people who were all searching for sustenance and survival and such. And that would have a huge impact on what we are, what we're doing, who we are and how we live. And so we're interested in all those kinds of things. And this hurricane, these multiple hurricanes that are running across Florida and up to the coast do nothing other than just emphasize, sharpen the point of the importance of being able to prepare for things like this. Now, this is a far bigger idea and notion than prepping, as you've heard about it. There's quite a movement, for those of you who are not in the States, there's quite a movement in this country, has been for a long time, that's generally called prepping. And it is a kind of a multidimensional kind of approach to being preparing for when the things don't work. This is all talk about the importance of communications. And so there's quite a movement within the community to get amateur radio licenses so that they can communicate if there is no other way to communicate. And so there are all these people. They tend to be rural. Maybe there are things, there are prepping groups in large cities, but I've not seen them, and certainly not in suburbs. Maybe there are. I haven't seen them. But they certainly exist out in the rural areas. And in the extreme, they're related to, independence and sovereignty and, things like that that are really presumed at a time when government doesn't work, and you've got to rethink all of the aspects of how we live together in this part of the world. But the prepping that I'm thinking about is it's it's a little less shrill, has a little less the kind of fear-based aspect to the whole thing. And certainly, we're interested in food. I mean, here in Berkeley Springs, we've got a very large farm garden that has, I don't know, a dozen people, maybe 10 or 12, who are all working on it. And our objective is food security. And we're interested in building a root cellar so that we can, sustain and store the produce over the winter time. And so, sure, we're interested in food, certainly interested in water. I mean, I recently purchased, I don't know what it is, a dozen big, I think they're 5-gallon containers that are all designed so that you can put water in them, so that you can have water no matter what. In my house, we live in far enough into the country that all of our water comes from wells. We have 3 wells, and one of them has a solar array on them, and it's got pump that works both on 110 volts on the line voltage and also works off of the solar system. And it has an automatic transfer and management kind of system that if the if the grid isn't working, then it automatically uses the solar to pump. And what we're doing is we have a cistern. I've got a 7,500-gallon cistern that's located uphill from where the well is, and this is on the farm. And it pumps the water up into the cistern, and then the cistern, you can pump it out of there, or you can gravity feed it downhill, or you can pump it out of there, and you can use that as irrigation for the farm garden. And so we've thought about this, and we've been working on these kinds of things for quite some time. And there's a very kind of a commonly presumed kind of handful of things. You need to have water, and you need to have food, and you have to have electricity, and you have to have shelter. And I presume there's another one in there somewhere. Regardless of where you come from and what your orientation is, this just kind of makes sense. There are religions like the Mormons, Church of the Latter-day Saints, who make it mandatory for all of their members to maintain at least a year's worth of food. And they have a very kind of robust supply system that I've taken advantage of in order to get food, backup food. I mean, I just got a delivery of yesterday, or was it today, of 4 or 5 packages, a week-long supply of food for 2 or 3 people. I mean, they're in a bag and they last for 30 or 40 years, 30 years or something like that. So that they're useful. You can grab them and you can run with it. I don't want to bore you with the details. Maybe we can come back and talk a little bit about it here, about how you put some of these kind of things together. But I want to make sure that you understand the importance and why we're doing these kind of things. We are moving into a period of extraordinary uncertainty, perhaps certainly more uncertainty than you've ever seen in all your lifetime, all of our lifetimes, and probably more kind of broad-based planetary-wide uncertainty than in recorded history. I think it would be fair to say. You have the convergence of a variety of big titanic forces, to say nothing about, the stuff coming from the sun that you've never seen before, major coronal mass ejections and solar flares and things, and waves of energy out of the center of the galaxy, and other kind of things that are all and a rapid decrease in the magnetosphere that protects us from all of this external and cosmic energy. And these kinds of things not happen in certainly in our lifetimes, and in general in recorded history that may have happened in one way or another in the past, and the subject of different kinds of petroglyphs and other kinds of aboriginal and ancient seeming myths and such. But certainly in the last couple thousand years, there hasn't been anything like this. Now, this is not just kind of random kind of stuff. These are these are really big things that happen on a kind of a cyclical and predictable kind of period. We are entering somewhere around 2030 or something, a predictable kind of transit of a major group of meteorites that happens every 6,000 years or something like that. And that is presumed to have very large comets that are embedded in it that you can't see right now. And when the ancient literature is full of a lot, not only pictures, but descriptions of what certainly are major comets that come by the planet at various times in the past. And in so doing, they dramatically upset the weather, storms, big events like the historical flood of the Bible and other earlier documents and stories all seem to be related in one way or another to major kind of comets that have come by. We've not seen anything like that in our lifetimes or in recent kind of history, and yet that seems to be on the near horizon, and those kind of transits huge and dramatic in terms of their effect, or they have been in the past at least, and generating major volcanoes and another such thing. So there are unique configurations of the planets. We're in a period now where there's 5 or 6 of the planets that are all located in one kind of 45-degree area out in space in one kind of sector there, and that then puts unusual gravitational kind of pressure on the force on the planet, on the Earth, and is presumably reasonably responsible for increases in volcanoes and earthquakes and such. And when you couple all these things and you put them all together, what it turns into being is a time of amazing and extraordinary kind of change. Don't forget climate change and the likelihood that it's going to get very cold for kind of an extended period of time, 60 years or so. And that's because of changes on the sun. And it is rather kind of seemingly clearly described by some new science, relatively new science out of Russia, that makes a very compelling case for the fact that it's not going to get warm, it's going to get cold. So you layer all of these things together at the same time, and you are suddenly into a period where the very context in which we live is not only uncertain, but the indications are, the likelihood is that they are dramatically different than what they've been in the past. Now, all of these, almost all of the narratives these historical narratives that talk about these things having happened in the past, and the kind of the regularity of the period and how often when they happen, every 6,000 years, every 12,000 years, and so on, all talk about the fact that out of the back end of this is, what commonly is the Bible, and other kind of sources talk about 1,000 years of peace. So this is a major disruption, the kind of the swan song, if you will, the old era, Kali Yuga, if you'd like, is ending with a bang, as they all do. Every one of these Yuga periods, by the way, are characterized by major events. That's the biblical flood was at the end of one of the Yugas. And so that's a predictable kind of aspect of the end of each one of these major 6 to 12,000 year periods. And the varying kind of analysts characterize the yugas as being at different lengths. Some of them say they're equal, 6,000 years apiece, every one of them. And some of them say that they vary. Some are shorter than others and some are longer. And my guess would be that there are some shorter and some longer, and because they're probably related to the theory is that they're related, that from the Hindus, scriptures suggest that there's a companion, a dwarf, a brown dwarf star that is a companion star to our sun. And the two of them swing back and forth around each other. And that means that our solar system accelerates dramatically as it comes headed toward this other brown dwarf, and then it decelerates sequentially over again, 6 or 12 or 24 years as it goes to the perigee, I think it is, and then turns, and as it kind of heads in again, then it speeds up. What that means, among other things, I believe, is that physics changes with the velocity of the solar system. And as the solar system accelerates, what you get is changes in things like time, and you get changes with some of the basics of physics. Of course, this is not mainline physics. They wouldn't agree with this. But that would, by the way, allow for the changing periods, the times of the yugas. And so some would be longer, some would be medium sized, some would be shorter, and that would be the relationship of the changing aspect of time and other aspects of physics that seem to attend these kinds of things. And so the point I'm trying to make here, kind of somewhat circuitously, is that that this is going to be a very unusual and unpredictable period, and therefore it behooves all of us, and through the whole spectrum of our experience and through our living, is to anticipate and plan for change, which means, in physical terms at least, this whole idea of preparation. Now, in the kind of the physical terms, the reason I'm here for this conference is because I'm representing an organization called American Contingency. It's a nonprofit, and I got involved with them because a friend of mine who lives in Berkeley Springs was the founder of the amateur radio division or group within American Contingency, and they now have about 4,500 hams. For those of you who don't realize that, amateur radio operators are called hams for some reason, and nobody seems to know why. But amateur radio operators, they have 4,500 of them around the country, and they are very active and have nets that meet on a regular basis just to be ready to provide alternative communications no matter what kind of an event shows up. And so they're very active in this whole problem in the situation up in North Carolina and in Tennessee. And for AMCON is what they go by. And for AMCON, they're pretty sophisticated and they're pretty professional and they have pretty smart people, and they got all kinds of, they think about food and they think about security and they think about all of these kinds of things, and they've got it very well kind of delineated. And then they have training and they have videos and they have also, it's not just this kind of one-off or small group of kind of preppers or people who are trying to tell you what kind of, how many kind of guns and whatever you need, although these guys are certainly interested in security, like I say, and there are a lot of former military people, and so they're into guns and they do defense and so on. But they're they're pretty professional and they're pretty sophisticated, and so and what I'm trying to kind of communicate is there's this growing sense and awareness, whether it's explicit exactly why people feel this way or not, but there's this growing sense that there's something really big inbound and it's going to certainly mess with the supply chains and kind of the fabric of how we all support ourselves as human beings on this planet, and that we ought to be thinking about this. We ought to be planning for it. I mean, if you think about what's happened up in North Carolina, there are a whole lot of people that are hurting very badly right now, in part because they don't have any backup, in some in a goodly number of cases, it wouldn't have made any difference how much backup they had put together because these rains and the floods have been so acute that then they came so fast that any kind of preparation you might have made would have been, you know, potentially washed away. But that situation is an anomaly, clearly an anomaly. And so in most situations, there are always people around the periphery, at least of the epicenter of these kind of events, the ability to sustain themselves, even given if the electricity goes out and you don't have water for a while. I mean, in North Carolina now, what they're estimating, it'll be a month before they ever get any water. It's just very, very hard in those kind of situations, and particularly if you don't have food, it doesn't take very long at all before all the kind of social fabric starts to disappear when people do not have food and they are looking for ways to sustain themselves and their families. And so this is all very real things, and the number of potential events that are commonly talked about these days related either to the election or to the larger kind of global situation of a global reset of the financial system or whatever it turned out to be. All of these things are highly disruptive and suggest that we ought to prepare, we ought to get ready in one way or another. And so that's kind of my message here. This is a time to actively and seriously think about the possibility that things won't work the way they have, that the world of a year from now may not be anything like what we've understood and become very familiar with all of our lifetimes. It's literally that. I mean, this is kind of staring us in our face right now. We've got multiple places on the internet, seemingly independent ones, who are all talking about the possibility that the whole internet and the power grid in North America, at least, would be shut down for 10 days, probably related to political and other kind of issues. But for whatever reason, if it happens, whether it comes from outer space or from the sun or whatever, or whether it's human generated, let me tell you, 10 days without electricity and without water and without food, that will be very, very memorable. And particularly if it was a large scale event. And so that's what we're up against there. We're up against we're at the end of an era, and what always has happened on these end of these yugas, you can go back historically and find the ancient literature that suggests that every time one of these eras, these yugas end, and the Kali Yuga that we're in right now ends next year, that there is always some extraordinary large disruptive event that kind of as a punctuation exclamation point at the end of that period. And so if in fact it continues that way and that sequence of events kind of replicates itself, then we're in for some very big things. And so communications and water and food and shelter and so on are going to be extremely important going forward. And so I would just like to suggest to you that this is not fringe anymore. This is moving itself into being kind of mainstream. And those of us who live outside of large urban areas have a distinct advantage here because we have the ability to kind of influence and control some of these major things like food and water and electricity in ways that it's next to impossible to do in large cities, in large urban areas. And so the effects of these events, if they in fact happen, are going to be disproportionate across a country like ours, or any country for that matter, depending upon kind of the concentration of population. And because, out where I live, you can, the supply chains can be relatively short and controlled because we generate them all ourselves. We have a degree of independence that's just as impossible to replicate in large cities. And so there's a lot of reasons to think very broadly what the potential implications are of these coming months and years, and where you want to live and how you want to be prepared and what you need to have, in your garage or in your basement, just in case you need it. And so I would, again, commend to you thinking about this in a very practical and way, because it's, as I said, no longer fringe. This is a time of significant change and uncertainty, and we all need, in order to be around to help build a new world out of the back end of this thing, we need to be planning for it now.
So thanks.